Hello, Matt.
Hey, Bill. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm rocking and rolling.
As we tape, the debt limit talks are very fluid. So who knows what might occur between now and this being uploaded. But since they said another round of talks was scheduled for Sunday, I'm hopeful we won't get scooped. And we can talk about what has transpired. And probably one of the biggest things that happened, which was not did not originate on a blog, but in the pre-blog newspaper column format, was David Brooks's piece, which has been mostly talked about as a smackdown of Republicans for having become unhinged and refusing to accept a largely conservative deficit reduction compromise laid out by the president. And perhaps we'll start then and let you talk about that, but I'll just note quickly that certainly there are folks on the left who were not necessarily displeased with Brooks, but unhappy that the deal was as such that Brooks could make such a comment. But why don't you talk initially about how are there conservatives out there saying Brooks has shown me the light, or is this sort of solidifying his estrangement from the conservative movement?
I think the latter. We had him, Jamie Weinstein here at the Daily Caller actually had an exclusive interview with him yesterday, and I've been putting up the videos at the Daily Caller. And a lot of people hate David Brooks in the comment sections.
Has anyone made an argument on the merits why Brooks is wrong? Like why this isn't? Like, if you have 17% of this deal of revenue raising, not increasing tax rates, everything else is spending cuts. Why should conservatives be upset with that?
I don't think anyone came to his defense. I think the reason is that I felt like the column was, it was ill-timed. I think it was damaging to the conservative argument, and
that was the point of the column, was it not?
Well, here's the deal, though. I think that there is an argument to be made, and I think good conservatives can make an argument that says, I will never support raising the marginal tax rate because that disincentivizes job creation and investment, and that's destructive. However, there are things, distortions, tax exemptions that were, over time have been put into the tax code that distort the market, that distort incentives, and that we could get rid of them, raise some revenue, and there would be, there would be no loss of jobs, or we wouldn't hurt the recovery. I mean, that's not an absurd argument, and I would.
You don't disagree with Brooks as far as that goes.
I mean, there's some, basically, I'm not a hardliner on that, and I think it's an interesting discussion or debate to be had. And had he stuck to that, I would have been okay with it, but I felt like his column went too far. I felt like it kind of aided and abetted the other side, and I think it did,
it was directly antagonistic. He was being very mean towards Republican leaders.
Intentionally, and it became a talking point. I mean, every time I turned on MSNBC, a liberal who was arguing in favor of tax increases was saying to somebody, usually Pat Buchanan, even David Brooks, a conservative columnist, says says Republicans have gone too far and that they're no longer a serious party. That's not helpful to the debate. That's not advancing this interesting idea about eliminating some of the weird things in the tax code that actually distort the market. And so I think.
From Brooks's perspective, isn't it exactly what he wanted? Didn't he want to have his column make this kind of impact so Republicans would have to move towards where he is in the argument?
That's a good question. I don't know what his I don't know what his incentives are. I don't know what his goals are. Generally, whether you like him or not, he's a nice guy, he's a funny guy, and I think he's very thoughtful, even though I don't always agree with him. But I felt like this piece could have been more effective had he actually avoided the tone that he took, which I thought was demeaning and dismissive and too much hyperbole. I think, again, had he made what I think is really an interesting argument, which is to say we should never raise the marginal tax rates. We should never do anything, whether it's a recession or not, that would stifle investment and growth. But that doesn't mean we can't get revenue from looking at some of these loopholes, fixing some of these loopholes, and also some of these benefits. And look, I don't necessarily agree with all of that. I think some of them, I think I would probably, as much as it would hurt me personally, I would probably get rid of the mortgage deduction. Maybe you offset that with some other tax cuts somewhere else. Maybe you get some revenue from that. I would probably not get rid of the charitable deduction, because I actually think charity, and this would maybe put me at odds with some, libertarians. I actually think charity is something that should be encouraged, and I think having it be tax deductible and having tax benefits come from it is probably healthy. But, this is a debate. This is a debate in good faith that we could have, and I don't think he did that. I think he poisoned the well, and essentially, rather than writing a piece that would provoke thought and debate and legitimate discussion among conservatives, I think he instead gave liberals who want to raise taxes a talking point.
Well, let me disagree with you on this, and maybe put it back into a bloggy context for the Week in Blog purposes. I was actually thinking earlier this week how the New York Times op-ed page has dramatically shrunk in influence since the rise in blogging. That when you used to really, many times in the course of a month, a New York Times column really be a tentpole in the national discourse.
Yeah.
And now there's a much bigger cacophony of voices out there, maybe combined with the fact that a lot of New York Times columnists are probably past their half-lives and are just doing a lot of rehash of their past.
It's hard for anybody. Nobody can dominate the way that a few big people once did.
Right.
I don't think
there are very few columnists that I think regularly shake up the discourse on a regular basis these days. And I thought the Brooks column was notable in that it broke out of that rut. And I'm not saying this as a Brooks cheerleader, because I've written plenty of critical things about Brooks.
Right, but the reason the piece broke out was not because it was insightful, and was not because it was provocative in the sense that it had anything interesting to say. It broke out just simply because it was man bites dog. If I wrote a column that said, I'm voting for Barack Obama next time, that would probably get attention too, but not because I said anything insightful. I think he missed an opportunity to actually make an interesting point in favor of this. And I don't necessarily think he did it for the attention either. I think maybe he was just really pissed off at Republicans, and I think his emotion got the best of him.
I think Brooks said exactly what he meant, and he got exactly the result that he wanted. To your point that he's not necessarily stoking a rich and nuanced conversation about which deductions are bad loopholes and which are proper incentives. I agree with you that we're not having a very erudite conversation about that now. He wanted to undercut the stated congressional Republican position of no new revenue raises whatsoever, and he arguably has done that. I think he's put them more on the defensive. Made a 1-2 punch along with Obama's press conference last week. That's made them unhappy. But as far as examples of column writing that actually has an impact, I agree with you that man bites dog is certainly a large part of why it did that. If Paul Krugman wrote that piece, it would have the same impact. And in fact, he's written that piece probably 10,000 times. but I do think combined with the fact that there is something to the argument that what is so not conservative about the deal that Obama's put on the table. I think there's some juice to that argument too, combined with the man bites dog element of it that gave that column more reach than the average column has these days.
Hopefully, I'll say something different. I don't want to just keep repeating myself because I don't just want to have the last word. But
I'll give you the last word.
Well, in summary, my take is that I think an opportunity was missed to have a real debate, which happens too often in this town. I think that the talk about the attacks on the Republican Party, I don't remember the exact language, but not a serious party, whatever. I think that was a bridge too far. I think that essentially, it was a missed opportunity to have an interesting debate, which I think, again, it's not silly, and I don't even know if it's nuanced, it's inside baseball, but it's entirely relevant right now, which is to say, are Republicans against tax cuts? I'm sorry, are Republicans against taxes because because high taxes, stifle, creating businesses, because low taxes, will allow more people to start businesses and thereby create more taxpayers and broaden the tax base? Or are Republicans just against revenue because they don't want government to have any money? That's a good question. And I think that he could have gotten at that, and I think he missed that opportunity, which is a shame. Maybe I'm raising it. Maybe people watch this, and maybe I've done that for them. So we'll see.
On the flip side of this, there was some commentary on the left in regards to the Brooks column, and my colleague / guy who signs my paychecks, Robert Borsaj, had a piece at ourfuture.org in the Huffington Post, and he has been very critical of the outlines of this deal. He's been urging congressional Democrats to speak out against the possibility of it. And his criticism of the Brooks column, that Brooks was mischaracterizing the Democrats in all this. Brooks said over the past week, Democrats have stopped making concessions. They're coming to the conclusion that if the Republicans are fanatics, then they better be fanatics too. And Borsaj lamented that would that if it were so, and then listed all the ways that Democrats have been continually conceding that the entire basis of the deal, that the ratio of spending cuts, the tax to revenue raises, we're not talking about increasing in tax rates, we're talking about things like loopholes and changing the deductions and whatnot, that is so heavily skewed towards spending cuts is to make it essentially an inherently conservative deal, and Democrats are refusing to speak out against it almost at any level as far as people who are actually in elected office. So there's that critique here, so a critique of Brooks that he's not characterizing the Democrats accurately, but really a broad critique of how Democrats are handling things that's coming from the left. You saw a piece in the Huffington Post today about how even the Congressional Progressive Caucus, their criticisms have been fairly muted. Most of the more strident criticism is coming from Campaign for America's Future, Progressive Change Campaign Committee, the Strength and Social Security Coalition, and the like. You haven't really seen a sense that if Obama does this deal, that he's not going to have the votes for it, which you have to be more worried about that for the outside critiques that get more traction.
I'm eyes are glazing over here, Bill. This deficit talk cannot take more. Budget deficit ceiling. Must talk.
You want to talk about the fun stuff?
Must talk Bachmann. Must talk something else.
I hear she has sex appeal.
I think she does. And look, I think that Vin Weber...
Oh my God, now you have to apologize.
I'm not going to apologize. And Vin Weber should not have apologized either. To quote Nigel in Spinal Tap, what's wrong with being sexy? Look, I think, Bill Clinton had sex appeal. I mean, not to me, but I think that was established by, probably Maureen Dowd and other female journalists.
I have a conservative female in my extended family that has said the same.
And, Michele Bachmann is pulchritudinous. I think I have sex appeal. And so I think, but I'm just so sick of these apologizing for stuff. Come on. Like, if you do something wrong, then apologize. But she is sexy. Come on. She's got sex appeal. What's the big deal? I will not apologize.
So is the Bachmann boomlet sustaining, or has there been a bit of a hesitancy returning there because she's made some missteps and whatnot after the rollout began? Is there people sort of holding back and still hoping for Perry or Palin to come in?
I think both. I think she's doing well, and I think people are still holding back and waiting for Perry and Palin to come in. I think that Bachmann, first of all, I was surprised the John Wayne Gacy comment didn't cause any more problems. That really, I thought that was going to blow up, and
I think she was saved by Dave Weigel.
Really? You think
Weigel
that
did a blog post saying, look, John Wayne was not that far away, and plenty of small towns claimed people who were in the vicinity, and it's highly likely she actually was mistaking the two, so let's shrug this one off, and I wouldn't be surprised if that dampened the impact.
That is interesting. I read Dave's piece, but I mean, do you think that he has that much of a megaphone that piece could have actually stopped people from pursuing that?
I mean, it certainly didn't shut down criticism from the left. Plenty of people on the left still, and I talked about this last week, I think there's still a large part of the left that is just giddy to make fun of Bachmann, regardless of how serious the issue is.
You know what I hope, Bill? When they try to take me down for saying Michele Bachmann has sex appeal, Dave Weigel is going to come to my rescue. When they try to come in here and take me away. That's what I'm counting on.
But I think Weigel is a pretty widely read blogger these days, both amongst liberal activists and mainstream media journalists. And so here was someone who clearly wasn't in the tank for Bachmann coming to her defense. Again, a bit of a man bites going there.
Well, that's the good thing about not being in the tank for anybody, too, is that people actually believe what you say because you're not a hack.
Right. I mean, the stuff about Bachmann that's come out about her taking Medicaid funding for
By the way, I wrote that
health clinic and what her husband has said about gays in the past, that stuff seems to be the thing that even the traditional journalists are sinking their teeth to a little bit more than that kind of stray comment.
Let's back up here because as you know, I wrote the definitive piece about Bachmann with the earmarks and the subsidies and all that stuff.
Which was a porker, right?
It was too far ahead of its time, Bill. I feel like some of the stuff I do I don't have the juice to push it always in. Although this did get attention. Rush Limbaugh and Levin attacked me, so it got some attention. But
this is sort of a bloggy point, if I may interrupt you. That almost everything gets written by somebody eventually. But the stuff that gets written at just the right, precise moment.
Yes.
And what that formula is often eludes me, or else I'd be a more successful blogger.
I think it's witchcraft,
a point where you write something, right when the subject at hand is rising in the media's estimation, where then it can have more traction. And if you call it, a few months in advance, it just sort of fades into the ether.
There is such a thing as being too far ahead of the curve, and frankly, happens to me all the time. Too far ahead of the curve.
But were you suggesting that despite your takedown of Bachmann as a porker in the past, you were defending her on the Medicaid charge?
Well, I recently defended her on this religion charge. There was a dude on MSNBC yesterday, some author. I'm going to give him any more publicity, but he basically accused her of wanting a theocracy, of wanting to stone gay people, all sorts of crazy stuff. And what I found interesting was Hugh Hewitt, the blogger and the talk radio host, and he wrote a book called A Mormon in the White House back I think in 2006, 2007, in preparation for Romney's campaign. He always warned evangelicals, if you don't defend Romney, or if you let people attack Romney, his Mormonism, as weird, then you're going to be next. They're going to think that the secularists are going to say that you're fringy because you whatever it is that your faith does that secular America might think is weird. Maybe it's snake handling. I don't know. Whatever it is, they're gonna use against you. And I think
evangelicals accepted that argument.
No, I don't think they did. But I think right now, Palin and Bachmann. What's happening with Bachmann a little bit. Maybe I don't know if this is just an anomaly or a harbinger of things to come. But they're definitely, there was some stuff said in that interview certainly that I thought was bigoted and uncalled for.
I'm sorry, in which interview?
Okay, so I wrote about this at the Daily Caller. There was an interview yesterday on MSNBC. I'm gonna pull this up so I don't. They had a guy on unchallenged, like he was on by himself promoting a book, and he was like supposed to be this religion expert. Apparently, his dad was actually a theological conservative. I'm going to read this to you. So. Let me get this here. It's on the Daily Caller, my blog. The guy's name is Frank Schaeffer, and he said of Bachmann, she comes from a wing of the evangelical movement where takes the Bible literally, and that includes the Old Testament that has passages about stoning gay people to death. Then he went on to say that evangelicals want to produce a theocracy in the country where the Bible would be paramount and no longer the Constitution, which sounds like the whole Sharia law argument. And he said that if evangelicals like Bachmann, quote, actually hate the United States as it is. So that's not just an attack on Bachmann. So I thought that was interesting, and we'll see if the if the sort of criticism of Romney and Mormonism, and going back further to JFK and Catholicism, if now evangelical Protestants are also about to become under attack.
Well, there's always been a part of the left that's very focused on those on the right who want to end the separation of church and state, and in particular focusing on a narrow group of evangelicals which get called dominionists, that say that essentially that government should be under the dominion of God, and I assume that's what Schaeffer was talking about there. And so people will sometimes people on the level will try to connect the writings of some of those specific evangelical leaders and try to connect dots to certain presidential candidates, and whether or not it's fair to make those guilt by association linkages,
right.
I suppose depends on the case and the evidence. As you know, we've talked in the past, so during the 2008 race, I'm not a big fan of guilt by association charges, but it's early in the Bachmann race, and I've only gleaned some of these articles about what her husband has said. He has said some pretty harsh things about homosexuality, maybe not literal stoning, but he said some harsh things. And I don't know if the fact that certain evangelicals have kept their distance from Mormonism means they're more susceptible to these types of charges. I think folks on the left would go after these people anyway. And to the extent that they have the goods on something, traditional reporters are gonna pick it up. I don't know if I don't think the Mormon issue impacts that one way or the other. Maybe they get more sympathy if they showed some more religious tolerance themselves. Then they'd be a little more insulated from those sorts of attacks. But I think those attacks would come regardless.
Well, and speaking of religion, there was a very interesting article by Michael Lind over at Salon that I just interviewed him for my podcast today that I found fascinating. He talks about, it's called The Three Fundamentalisms of the American Right. And he starts off by talking about how, this is very in the weeds, but he talks about how Burkean conservatism is, fond of tradition and is sort of, it's orthodox. And that, the sort of social conservative thing is the opposite of that. And this manifests itself in religion. So, like, the sort of Burkean Orthodox thing tends to be like Anglican or Catholic. And then you have, on the other hand, sort of, for lack of a better word, the social conservatives, the Christian right, like Southern populist Protestants, more fundamentalist, right? And so sort of eschewing tradition and orthodoxy. And these are entirely different worldviews. And he goes on to make this interesting point that this doesn't just manifest itself in politics, but it also, it doesn't just manifest itself in religion, but also, in your worldview of everything, including, Lynn says, the Constitution, right? So he draws an analogy whereby fundamentalist Christians believe that the Bible is, was correct, and that the early church had it right, but then it became sort of perverted over time. The Middle Ages, Catholicism got corrupt, and it wasn't until later that there was this, revival or whatever with Martin Luther, right? And so he argues that they make the same calculation with the Constitution and the Founding Fathers, and also with people, economists, like whether it's Hayek or whatnot, that they would literally interpret Hayek and take it as the gospel truth. And in any event, I don't agree with all of his conclusions, but I thought it was a fascinating thought piece. And check out my podcast with him as well.
I mean, the conclusion is that these conservative camps are irreconcilable?
Well, there were a couple of conclusions. I don't think he thinks they're irreconcilable. I pushed him on that, and he never really answered that question during my podcast. I think one point he makes is that the fundamentalists have essentially won the day as of now. You have people like Bachmann who sort of hold to that worldview. And this is according to Lynn. I don't think I'm taking him out of context, but I think he would argue that if you're a fundamentalist, and all that implies, not just religion, but if that's your worldview, then it's your way or the highway. You can't, if you believe something is, completely true, the gospel truth, you can't really negotiate. And so that's sort of the argument I think that he's making, is that this sort of hardline approach that Republicans are taking, let's say with the debt ceiling talks. I think he would argue that is a manifestation of fundamentalism. It's a weird, I know it's a very philosophical idea, and I don't necessarily buy all of it, but interesting stuff.
But you think that that kind of fundamentalist view is going to, because there's been an argument that the Tea Party has been less moored to fundamentalist Christian right issues, which I don't necessarily agree with, but it's been out there. What Lynn seems to be saying, and what you're suggesting with the rise of Bachmann, is that the fact that she is such a social conservative and such a fundamentalist on these things, that would undercut the notion that the Tea Party is somehow separated from these religious conservative issues.
It could. I think, there have been surveys or studies that show that most Tea Party folks are social conservatives also. But I do think it's a matter of focus and a matter of priorities. And certainly in recent years, the priority of everybody, including Bachmann, is to talk about the economy. So, but I think that Lynn would argue that regardless of what the focus is today, that the worldview that a person who is a fundamentalist holds might make them intractable. Again,
what strikes me as strange about it, if I might bring us back to the debt ceiling stuff, there was such a narrative coming out from the Tea Party and the House freshmen, that we're going to be Greece. We're going to be Greece tomorrow unless we do something about our debt. All is lost. America's in decline unless we do something about our debt. And that is not the same thing as no new taxes. That's saying that we have a deficit reduction imperative that we have to solve, or else the country is going to collapse. That would seem to speak against having a fundamentalist view on revenue. And now it seems like the rubber's hitting the road, and if you really believe we're going to be Greece tomorrow, well, here's the compromise that would avert that.
I think the problem with your argument is that conservatives believe that raising taxes will hurt the economy and will prevent a recovery, and so.
But I agree with you, and
this is
obviously as the rubber's hitting the road, we are falling back to more traditionally stated conservative positions. But it's different than saying, the argument that we're going to be Greece is about our debt, and if you're saying, well, maybe we'd be Greece, but raising taxes is really, 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 really bad, and that would be worse than becoming Greece. So if that's what's on the table, I'll take my chances of being Greece because raising taxes is the absolute worst thing in the world. That's a different argument.
I think that it's conservatives sincerely believe that raising taxes will do nothing to prevent us from becoming Greece and may actually expedite the trip. You may find that absurd, but that is what conservatives, and this isn't BS. This isn't because I don't have a corporate jet bill, and I'm not rich. But this is what I believe, and it's a sincere belief. And I think this is just something I want to point out, because I think a lot of times people assume that players and actors on both sides of the political spectrum have these ulterior motives. Well, people actually do believe in things and believe in philosophy. And you may disagree with the philosophy. I'm not talking about you personally, Bill, but the viewers out there. But,
I believe that conservatives believe that any tax increase would be a disaster. I think the disingenuous part came before. All the talk about Greece, I think, was a disingenuous part.
Okay. I see. Well, I will say this. It is interesting. Well, and you're right. First of all, it's interesting to me that a lot of liberals, I didn't know this until like a couple months ago. I think you pointed it out to me maybe, that a lot of liberals don't really think we have a debt problem.
Oh, absolutely.
That blew me away. I didn't even because to me it's just so obvious that we do. I just took it as like common, like you said, liberals don't believe the sky's blue, or
there are certain liberals who would say there literally is no debt problem, and I'm not one of them. And I would say most liberals are not quite in that camp. But that's been put out there by John Kenneth Galbraith, and there are some folks that have pushed that. I'd say most liberals are saying, yes, there is a longer-term debt issue here, but it's not imminent. We're not going to be Greece tomorrow. We actually have an excellent bond rating. Interest rates are low right now. The bond market's actually buying into American treasuries because it seemed to be so safe. So therefore, there is more that we can. There's more deficit investment that we can do right now to create jobs. That the jobs is the imminent crisis. We can have a 20, 30-year plan that puts up some upfront stimulus, but has savings down the line that would avert any kind of longer-term fiscal instability. I'd say that is the more mainstream liberal position right now.
And the analogy would be for conservatives would be that they would argue that tax cuts or making tax cuts permanent or whatever is actually like a stimulus.
Right. These are sort of it's the two sides of the ideological coin. The liberals that don't think deficit reduction is imperative, and the conservatives that don't think deficit reduction is imperative, because both argue they have growth strategies that would reduce the size of the debt relative to GDP. So don't get hung up on the ledger today, focus on growth tomorrow. But over the past few months, conservatives have generally not made that growth argument, as at least their lead argument. Their lead argument is, holy crap, we're going to be Greece. And now that Obama sort of met that, saying, okay, let's do some mix of spending cuts and tax increases to avert that. Now conservatives will be reverting back to their more growth-oriented arguments and less about their bean counter arguments.
Well, hey, I think we'll probably have a short show today, Bill, but you were going to talk, Michael Lind, I want to get back to this, the three fundamentalisms of the American right, which I thought was a fascinating, thought-provoking piece, especially as Bachmann continues to rise. I think I said this before the other week, but I do think that Rick Perry is for real. I think he's going to run, and he could tap into, I think, the Tea Party movement and the, social conservative movement.
He meets all the pillars.
The establishment, is executive experience. But tell me, what's your take on Lind? Because he's an interesting cat. He was a conservative and now is pretty much a liberal, I think. What's your take?
Well, I'm not a fan of Lind for different reasons. I mean, unrelated to what he's saying about fundamentalism. He generally has taken a pro-infrastructure position, but then he says very, I would say, disingenuous things about wind and solar power, for example. So he wants to be a made in America guy, but then he's very dismissive about people talking about making green power in America and saying that there's not enough of it. It's a wild goose chase, and I just don't think he has his facts straight on the subject. And much as you didn't like the way David Brooks was antagonistic towards Republicans in his column, I think when Lind writes about this stuff, he is way too crude, simplistic, and outright mean to the point of making a wrong point. So that's my personal critique of Lind.
So let's have Lind.
I don't think it certainly qualifies him as saying he's now completely fled the conservative fold and joined the liberal flock because he takes his pot shots at liberals still.
Lind versus Brooks, the next The Weekend Blog.
But one other topic I want to bring up quickly, I don't want to take up too much time. Obama did do this Twitter town hall this week, so sort of another milestone in new media. And coming off of the big Twitter scandal with Anthony Weiner, perhaps Twitter was looking for something to sort of revive the brand politically, so it's good about politics and not just a gateway to embarrassment. But there were a couple of pieces, one in the Republic and one in the Daily Beast, saying that Obama missed an opportunity, that he handled it in a lame fashion. He didn't actually tweet himself. He spoke for too long. The questions themselves were... some people noted they were more about jobs than what traditional reporters ask, but you get this one question and no opportunity for follow-up, so Obama gets to hold court, and it's a veneer of transparency and not real give and take. So those critiques were put out there. I thought the New Republic author, his name is escaping me, forgive me, but he was suggesting that what Obama should be doing is not having these staged new media events like a Facebook town hall or a Twitter town hall, but he should be tweeting all the time. He should be sort of having regular engagement with the public on Twitter. And considering, in my personal view, I think Obama has done, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm quite sure this is true, more town halls of any sort than any president ever. I think he's put himself out there a whole lot more, and not to say there aren't aspects of things being staged. Every president does that, of course. But I think he's been more vulnerable to the random negative question than almost any president that I can think of. The classic example of that was that one supporter of his that professed being exhausted defending him. That resonated quite widely. I'm sure Obama wasn't happy about that being a YouTube moment. So considering that he does all that on a pretty regular basis, the notion that he should be doing regular tweeting, which would not really be conducive to, I think, richer discourse. Tweets are obviously way too short to talk about anything in a nuanced fashion that presidents generally have to do. You don't want to start a market panic by saying something a little bit too glibly on Twitter, or cause some sort of foreign policy crisis because you couldn't communicate your entire thought. I don't think that's a realistic suggestion, and so I think the fact that Obama does these things, and granted there are downsides and limitations, on the whole, I think he's advancing the cause of transparency. But I don't know if you have a different take on how these things have been handled.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think the answer is for him to tweet more. I think there are many, many more substantive things to worry about than whether or not Obama's tweeting. I even think I'm sick of these stunts. When I say stunts, I mean Twitter town hall, Facebook town hall. Here's what it reminds me of. There used to be a time when like every campaign had like an campaign director, right? And I'm sure some still do, and some of the committees probably still do. But really, at some point, like your press secretary or your communications director is also an campaign director, right? I mean, like, you shouldn't have a campaign where the press guy is like a 70-year-old, guy wearing a hat, smoking a cigar, and doesn't know anything about blogs. Bring in the campaign guy, right? I mean, it's just like everything now is integrated, and it's not like bloggers and people on Twitter and Facebook need to be like treated or segmented. So I mean, at one point maybe it was like cool and needed, but now I just think it's kind of lame. So just have a freaking town hall meeting.
I feel like there are people who are primarily Facebook people, and there are some people that are primarily Twitter people.
Right, but if you have
I'm
regular
someone
town hall
who
meeting,
has connected their accounts, so I don't consider myself in one camp or the other. But I certainly there are certain people I see very active on Facebook that I don't see on Twitter, and vice versa. And my sense of the president's overall communications media strategy is that you're dealing with a fractured media landscape with all sorts of niches, and therefore you're going to do everything you can to put the president out in every niche possible over the course of the presidency. You don't have to worry about overexposure because not everyone's going to see you every time that you're out there. And that's true for new media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, as well as hitting local TV stations or regional newspaper editors or what have you. That seems to be the strategy. Leave no niche, uncovered. And I see no evidence that it's hurting him, or what that or if he did something differently, he'd somehow be getting his message out there better. I mean, obviously he has his difficulties because of the economy, but I think for the most part he gets his message out, considering how difficult that is, even when you are the president.
You make a good argument. I just don't know why every town hall meeting can't incorporate a Facebook component or a Twitter component. Why they need to brand it, or I don't know. It just, to me, it seems a little gimmicky. But if it works, they should do. I mean, you do what works, and it seems like you sincerely believe that that there still is a need for this.
I mean, certainly people participated. I mean, not half the country, but it seems like there are people who consider themselves sort of part of the Twitter community that were eager to engage the concept. They didn't just snub the nose at it and say this is somehow, the lame old guy pretending he's cool. People use the hashtag. People engage on the Facebook town hall. Until people stop showing up, I think they're going to keep doing it.
Yeah, it may be again that I am so cutting edge, Bill, that this is lame to me. And yet,
Google Plus now. Facebook is over.
Somebody needs to invite me to Google Plus. I'm not even.
You don't have an invite yet?
I'm not even invited, dude. I can't even get on it.
Let me see if I can hook you up.
Could you hook a brother up? I guess.
Right.
Like, does that mean?
Figure out how the damn thing works.
Does that mean that someone else had the ability to grab Matt Lewis on Google Plus, or is that not my handle?
I mean, excuse me if I'm revealing too much.
Is it your,
I think
is
because
it your
you have
email?
a Gmail address, I think Google will be able to spot you and say, here are people you might consider inviting, and so I think I can. I will see. I will see what I can do.
Let's see what you can do. Maybe you could put in a good word, and
whoever can talk. If we can get you on, that might be a good topic for later.
That would be great.
If Google Plus is going to be something that has any political impact, I think it might, but it's early, and there's certainly people who are gravitating to it more as opposed to Google Buzz or Google Wave, which were busts. And there's a certain degree of trash talking now going on between people who are Facebook loyal and Google Plus loyal.
I mean, I'm definitely seeing people getting on Google Plus, and I'm seeing, it seems like it's catching on to a certain degree.
Well, I don't want you to miss out, so I'll do what I can.
Thank you. I mean, you would think that I would be like an opinion leader that Google would seek out, early and for the beta version.
I gotta say, I have some conservative friends on Google Plus now who really, if they haven't invited you, I'd be a little ticked off.
Nobody has. I'm like, they're trying to keep me down.
Well, we'll discuss that more on another show.
All right, let's do it. To be continued.
So, for another edition of the Weekend Blog, I'm Bill Scher at liberaloasis.com and ourfuture.org.
And I'm Matt Lewis, reminding you to stay classy, San Diego.
I'll probably be gone next week, but I'll catch you in 2 weeks.
Yes, we'll be back, the old team back together again. All right, man. Well, have a good vacation or whatever you're doing. I'm sure it's an undisclosed location.
Undisclosed beach.
Yes.
Take care.
All right, bye. Thanks.
Bye.